Good. Hello. Just a hello is fine. No need to clap. Just a hello. That's good. You're going to have to excuse me. I've caught a little bit of a cold in your very, very cold country. So if I have to take a tissue out once in a while, please, apologies. I've tried to learn how to type and blow my nose at the same time, but it's just not very well working very well. Anyway, welcome to this JetBrains night. My name is Hadi, and I work on the developer advocacy team. And I'm going to show you a few tips and tricks in IntelliJ. I'll try and come up with some new ones because I know that I've given this a few times, but we'll see how it goes. If I don't have any new tips or tricks, well, actually I don't have any tricks. I've got some tips. But if every tip that I show, you know, I promise you I've got some new jokes as well. Okay? So, first thing I wanted to show you is something that a lot of people don't actually use, which is our toolbox. How many of you know this? Raise your hands if you know the toolbox. Yeah? So this is our toolbox over here. And essentially what this allows you to do is install all of our applications, all of our IDEs, uninstall them, update them, have multiple versions, everything. And then you can log into your JetBrains account, and then through the JetBrains account, then you can access all of your licenses, etc. So you don't need to worry about putting in your license every time. And the cool thing is that in the case of things like IntelliJ, for instance, I can go to the settings, and here I can set the maximum heap size, which is something you often set when you say that IntelliJ has run out of memory, right? In that department, IntelliJ is trying to compete with Slack to see which one consumes more memory. So you can set the settings over here. Okay, so this is kind of like the preferred way to now update your application. Okay. Now, the next thing I want to show you very quickly, which is probably the most important thing of this entire presentation. So if I create a new file, let's go ahead and create a new file. Let me go to live, not live, live, or placeholder. Okay, it doesn't want to have anything. Let's go down here, and let's create a new Kotlin file, something. Okay, so if I write, for instance, main, and then if args size equals 0, right? And you see that little thing over there, right? Over here. So that's actually 2. Yeah, this is like the, ooh. This is the ooh moment. This is like the only ooh moment you will see in this entire presentation. Well, that and this. This is even, oh wait, this is even nicer. Watch. Ooh. And then we have f equals x comma y, x plus y. Did you see that? Okay. So, oh, and this just gets better and better. Watch this. I put a third one. Oh, that is just beautiful. So that is font ligatures, right? So if you go to the console, you enable font ligatures, and then you install a font such as Fira Code, and then you get those nice, beautiful looking fonts, right? The other beautiful thing that I'm going to show you, I won't show you now. I'll show you later. Okay, so I'm going to, go away. Kotlin is like constantly releasing new versions. Okay, so the other thing that I want to show, you're all, how many of you have actually used IntelliJ? Okay, more than a year? More than 5 years? More than 15 years? There are people that have used it more than 15 years. So you all know the keyboard shortcuts, the very quick keyboard shortcuts that, like, extract functional parameter, which is Command O, and you can see at the bottom it shows the keyboard shortcut that I'm pressing. So Command O will go to the class, extract functional parameter, that goes to the actual, uses camel case completion to go to that. So those are typical ones that, Shift Command E, which takes you to a file. So, like rename will take me to a file. You can actually put dashes and say, for example, streams, and that will take me to the folder streams, right? You can use the dashes. And then Shift Command, Alt Command O, which, let's say I do get ID, that will show me all of the get IDs. Now, if you're writing Java code, you probably have, I don't know, 20,000 get IDs in your project. So if I want to go to a specific get ID, I could navigate to the class. Obviously, I could do, for instance, order, and then here, bring up the structure window, and then in the structure window, navigate and say, for example, get ID, and notice how the completion also works there, the search. But that's a little bit slow. So what I could do is just hit order and then get ID. And then what that does is does the camel case, does the filtering based on the namespace and then class name, the type, and then the ID. So that allows me to go quickly to a specific type. Okay? So those are very common ones that are available and have been for some time. And then, of course, if you go to a specific type here, I can press Command B, for instance, to go to the actual implementation and navigate back and forth, right? And all of those, as you know, are available with the search everywhere, which a lot of people seem to not know that double shift is search everywhere. And if you actually open up IntelliJ the first time in your life, there's a big thing in the middle that says search everywhere, double shift, and yet people seem to miss it. But the double shift also allows me to do many things, like if I say extract functional, you see that it allows me to tab across all of the different segments. But it also gives me history, that I can navigate back and forth with the left cursor through all the things that I've seen. And if I want to install a setting, or I want to go to plugins, for instance, I can bring up the settings window and go to plugins from here and then find the plugin. But you can also do that with search everywhere. You can just write plugins, find anything that plugins, or put the hash key and then write plugins. And that will bring up all of your plugins. And then from there, you can switch them on or off. Okay? Now, one other thing that you can do is set settings. So for instance, if I say editor, I can set specific settings from here as well, including navigation bar. So I can show the navigation bar or hide it. Right? And we'll see what we can do with that. So these are a lot of shortcuts that you have to remember all the time. If you don't want to remember the shortcuts, just press Shift Command A, and that will basically invoke the action dialog box, and from here you can do anything. So refactor this will bring me the refactor shortcut. And we have this thing called test RESTful web services. How many of you have used this? And I'll show you this later on. But the good thing about this, like this one doesn't have a keyboard shortcut. And I don't want to assign a keyboard shortcut to it. But if I write rest, for instance, you see that I go through restore, and I have to navigate down to find test RESTful. And sometimes instead of using keyboard shortcuts, you can use abbreviations. So if we go to key map, and over here we look for test rest. So we have it, where do we have it? Here. See that I can say add abbreviation TR, right? When I add that, then now when I do Shift Command A and write TR, that will immediately bring up the actual action. So you can assign abbreviations using these things. Okay. Now the project window is over here. That's very simple. One keyboard shortcut that I wanted to show you is Command E takes you to the recent files, right? And I can navigate back and forth. And a lot of the navigation that you should be doing is with recent files, not with tabs. Switch off tabs. They're horrible. And you can press Shift Command E to go to recent edited files, much the same way. And this, of course, toggles. If you're using two files, it will always toggle back and forth. But sometimes what you want to do is when you're navigating through here, you want to find your entry in the project window. So you can activate the auto scroll from source in the settings But the problem with that is that every time I change, it will automatically jump, right? And it's a little bit horrible because I don't want that behavior. So what I usually do is there's an actual action which doesn't have a keyboard shortcut, and it's select in project view, right? And I remove that, and I actually add the keyboard shortcut Control-Alt-L, which is not assigned. And then this essentially allows me, when I navigate, to press Control-Alt-L and immediately find what I'm looking for in the Project Explorer. Okay? And the navigation bar, as I said, you switch off, hide it. If you ever want to invoke it, just use the keyboard shortcut. And this is useful because it's contextual. So if I'm in JetBrains folder here, I can press Command N, and what that will do is allow me to create a new file directly in that location, right? Okay? And talking about editing, let's edit some code. But let's first write some Java. So let's create a Java class. What's the first class that you create after you learn Hello World in Java? So the first time you write Java code, it's Hello World. The second time, what is it? A factory. Because in Java, we love our factories, right? So buffered reader, that's completion. Buffered reader equals new buffered reader. Now, notice when I do completion, I get everything, right? Which kind of sucks. Control-Shift-Space gives me smart completion, which means it will only give me what's available in that context. New file reader, something new. Okay? By the way, these things over here, they're parameter hints, right? And you can actually switch them on and switch them off, right? So if we go to settings, parameter hints, okay, I'll show it later, never mind. Okay, back to editing. Postfix completion. I write buffered reader, not null. That's postfix completion. It allows me to do completion afterwards. Hippie completion. So for instance, I say, here, string name, data, all of the different datas. So if I start to write data here, string, that will give me nothing. So I can invoke hippie completion, and that will toggle through all of the different completions that I have starting with D. Now the cool thing about that is that that also works inside strings. So if I type a string, and then that allows me to toggle through the entire string as well. Okay? When I want to select code and when I want to shrink and expand code, I can do extend selection, shrink selection, which is very simple to get by, instead of having to use the cursor keys. And then, if I want to move code around, if I want to select an empty line, I go on the empty position in the cursor, and then I move the lines up and down, right? Don't copy and paste, because that sometimes leads to errors, as we all know. And then, of course, you have multiple carets, which allows you to basically set carets everywhere you want, select code, paste code, do anything you want, okay? And that's not something that you should be using for refactoring. And talking about completion, which we are, there's also the complete statement. So notice here that I've got data 1, and instead of going to the end and pressing semicolon, I can be anywhere I want and hit Control, Shift Control Enter. And that gives me complete statement, right? The good thing about that is that I can do that anyway. So nice thing, empty, and that gives me complete statement directly there. Right. Now, JSON. You all work with JSON, right? Yes or no? Yes. Good. People, be alive. I'm the one with the code here. So you write JSON like this, and every time you type the quote, it doesn't work because you have to escape the quote character and constantly mess around with everything that you're typing. This has been in IntelliJ for years. Inject language reference, JSON, right? That now makes this JSON fragment. And now I can hit Alt-Enter and say Edit JSON fragment. Okay? And now I can just write some JSON. But you can thank me if you like. The cool thing about this, of course, is that this is now JSON. So this means that anything I type here will show me that it's invalid JSON, right? Now the problem with it, well, the problem with this, the thing with this is that this is for your settings. So if you check this code into GitHub or wherever, and someone else checks it out, they're not going to see this unless you check in your configuration settings, which is your workspace, etc. But you can persist this by hitting Alt-Enter, and it should actually sometimes dies on me, but you can essentially say language JSON. That should actually be an intention. So now this is essentially persisted. So it knows that the string underneath is JSON. And this, of course, works with many things, because when you notice when I did the inject language reference, I have a whole bunch of things, including regular expressions. So this, notice that this is now actually a string, right? It's all green. Alt-Enter, inject language reference, regular expression. This now becomes a regular expression, right? Notice the color highlighting. And then I can hit Alt-Enter and say check regular expression. Okay? So this is, for example, a credit card, Visa card that has to start with 4. And if I put a 5 in here or a 6, it will automatically say that that is not a regular expression. Okay? And then if I, again, create a regular expression here, I also say inject language, regular expression, and now I get completion, right? So I get completion of the groups that I am defining in my regular expression. Right. A few more things with strings. Multi-line strings. You all know how to create a multi-line, and actually, let me I got to hide something from you because it's what I want to show you now is how fast IntelliJ boots up. And that. That is the other thing I wanted to show you, the neon cat, right? That's a plugin. And it's really, really cool. Once you install it, you just don't want to get rid of it. Also, I want to show you the errors. You see these errors? They're nice as well. Fantastic errors. So you all know how to create multi-line strings, right? It's very, very simple. It's like child's play. How do you do the opposite? I asked this the other day, and someone said to me, you press Control-Z? Well, yes. But I mean, when you do a million other things. Shift-Control-J allows you to join strings, okay? Which is much easier than doing something like this, okay? So Shift-Control-J allows you to join them. Now, I showed you multiple cursors, and I said to you, don't do any refactoring with multiple cursors. And the reason is that a lot of people, when they come to IntelliJ or to any of our tools, they start to do refactoring using multiple cursors. And that's a little bit painful because you shouldn't be doing that, right? There's so many different refactorings built into IntelliJ that it's just, it would require a whole 2 hours to just go through the refactorings. But what I suggest always is that when you are somewhere, press the Control-T menu to get the refactor this, and see which ones are actually working. And this is something we can improve on, because for instance, on our Resharper tools, which is now we also have a .NET IDE, which is Rider. This is context sensitive. So based on where you are and what you select, it's contextual. Unfortunately, in IntelliJ, it still is not. But it would be very nice if it were. So we have things like extract functional parameter. Right? So if I come to extract functional parameter, I can select this and go to refactor and say functional parameter. Right? So if you're using Java 8, this allows you to essentially take a function and extract it as, take a parameter and extract it as a function, which is very useful in not only allowing you to not have to do this refactoring manually. Obviously, anywhere where this function is called, it's going to update it. But it's also useful in that it shows you a little bit about the language, right? Especially if you're new to the language and you don't know how to do things properly in it, it allows you to do it. You can go to type migrations, for instance, right? On the type migrations here. And I can say, for instance, on this array list, right? Refactor this and do type migration and convert this to a string array, right? So this does the type migration for me, and I don't have to do this manually, right? And anywhere it's referenced, it does it for me. Replace inheritance, right? I take this replace inheritance, and I can say replace, refactor, replace inheritance with delegation, and it does the delegation for me, composition. These are all things that I find over and over again that people are just doing manually as opposed to just letting the IDE do it. And again, this isn't about the 3 lines of code we've changed here. This is about all of the places where this code is being referenced and instantiated and things change. Okay? Now, the next area is some things around analysis. And you all know this little red, green, yellow line that we have, box that we have in the corner, which is all of the different inspections that we have. And we have something like 30,000, I don't know, 2,000, 3,000 inspections already in IntelliJ. And these are all configurable, each and every one of them. And I'll show you how to configure them in a moment. But for instance, if I go to single line lambda, this inspections also allow me, the analysis is not only about the inspections that we get, but other things. So for instance, here I can say, show me the expression, the type of the expression. And it allows me to select from everything on that single line of lambda. What exactly do I want to know the type for? So is it I random less than 2, and it says to me that that's a lambda expression. If it's this, a little bit more selection, it tells me that it's a type Java stream, right? And so on and so forth, it says to me that that's void, for instance. So it allows me to, if I select a code on Lambda, it will tell me the exact expression for that code. And if not, it allows me to select anything in that Lambda to figure out what the type is. Another interesting analysis is the data flow, right? So if I go to the data flow here, and I'm on the ID, and I can say data flow from here, or go to analyze data flow to here. It shows me everywhere that is reaching this, right? So if we do this across the entire project, it's going to show me everywhere that is actually setting this value, right? Which is really useful, again, when you're crossing some legacy code base, for instance, and you there's no tests, and you want to, for instance, do some refactoring. It's awesome to know where this data is being set from, for instance, right? Apart from the find usages. Obviously, the find usages gives you information, but it's important to also know where this data is being set. Much the same way, you can see data analysis from here, right? Which is saying where this data is being read. So in this case, you can see that it's the public getter and setter, but obviously you can apply this to any type of method, to any type of property, etc. Another thing, duplicate classes. Now, we love our duplicates, right? Well, copying and pasting is the most effective form of programming, and I just said that publicly. So, analyze, right? Locate duplicates, entire cross project. And here you can select the different languages that you want to locate duplicates for, and whether you want to anonymize local variables, fields, etc. It means I don't care about the method names. I just want to find anything that's potentially duplicate. Runs it across the entire project. Shows me all of the places where there are potential duplicated code. And if you're using something like TeamCity, for instance, you can run this same analysis on the server. And the same analysis then can even be used to fail a build, right? If I have too much duplicated code, fail my build for me. Okay? Now, all of these different inspections, some of them are shown here, right? So for instance, I come to for here and I say replace with for each. This is an inspection that says, you know, well, there's a nicer way to do this construct and you can replace with a for each. In other cases, it could say that, you know, here, for instance, this safe delete duplicate because it's not used. All of these obviously are configurable. And a lot of people, when they come to the IDE, they're like, oh, I hate this because it's like complaining about absolutely everything that I am doing, right? You can configure all of this. So if I come to inspections, you see that I have all of my inspections over here. And based on the language, I can configure each one. And I can say whether I want it switched on, whether I want it switched off, and the severity level that I want. Error, warning, weak warning, severe problem, and you can even edit your own severities. And error obviously means error to IntelliJ. It does not mean that the Java compiler is going to spit out an error for you. And again, these inspections, in fact, whether you're using TeamCity or not, can also be run on the server side. So with TeamCity, it's built in. If not, there is a way for you to run inspections using the command line in IntelliJ. So you can actually load up a project, run the inspections, and see if they are violating some code or not. One thing that we added recently is, because we add new inspections in every release of IntelliJ, or nearly every release, one thing we added is a way for you to figure out which ones are new. And if you write 2017.3, which is the version of IntelliJ, it will filter down for you the inspections that are new in this specific version, right? Now, there is no problem, but there is no problem at all. These inspections are built into IntelliJ. If you want to create your own inspections, what you have to do is write a plugin, okay? And you write a plugin, and then you can obviously add another feature to it, which is a quick fix. So for instance, this is the intention, the quick fix that says convert the variable concat to string builder, right? And this is all done by a plugin. Now, writing plugins isn't something that everyone wants to do or everyone should do. So what happens if I, for instance, want to make sure that certain patterns or certain code smells are not written in my code base? How could I solve that problem? For that, we have this structural search, or search structurally, right? And this is essentially an advanced search template. How many of you have ever used this? Absolutely no one. It's been around for like a decade. So here, I'm going to write some code, right? So I write code, catch, exception, E, and then we'll do system out, E, get message. Okay? Now, what's wrong with that code? Anybody? Shout. Or say it's absolutely beautiful code. There's nothing wrong with it, except that I use 2 spaces instead of 4 spaces. Or even dare and say I use tabs, not spaces. Nothing? Nothing wrong with that code? So what am I doing? I'm catching a general exception. And all I'm doing is printing that out to the screen. For that, I might as well not do anything. And second of all, I shouldn't really catch the top-level inspection in my code. Now, what I can do with this is search for this kind of code in my code base. And this code here is essentially a placeholder. So if I click on Edit Variables, what this gives me is the constraints of this variable. So I can say here, I want this to be code that could be from 1 to infinite or 1 to 0 to 1 lines of code. In my case, I want it to be 1 to infinite or unlimited. I can say that it needs to match a regular expression. I can say that it needs to be of a specific type. In my case, all I'm saying is that this can be any code from 1 line to 1,000,000 lines. Hit OK, hit find, and it will search across my project and find everywhere where I have this code, right? And then I can go and say, this code is wrong. You shouldn't be writing this code. Which is okay, it's nice, but the problem with this is that this is an opt-in thing. This is me having to search for this code across my project. I would like more for developers that are working in my code to be able to see that this code that they've just written isn't the best code. So what could I do? Well, what I could do is come to inspections, search structural, and say enable structural search. Then add a search template. In this case, I'm adding this template. Bad exception handling. Okay? And I'll set the severity to warning. Hit OK. As soon as I do that, my code base now highlights code like this. And if I hover over it, you see that it says bad exception handling. Now that's just one sample. You could essentially create any kind of template there, right? But that's okay. If I hit Alt-Enter, what does it say? It says inspection structural search options. Let's go ahead and see what we can do with this. So instead of adding this, I'm going to remove this. Let me first move it. And instead, I'm going to say add replace template. And I'm going to say get rid of all that horrible code and don't catch top-level exceptions. Just if you're doing that, you might as well just write out the code. Hit OK. Bad exception handling. Right? Now hit OK. I still get the warning. If I hover over, I get the light bulb, but now I get an intention. Okay? So with just defining a template for search and the replace, I've essentially enhanced IntelliJ's inspections with my custom code smell and optionally a way to replace that code smell quickly with Alt-Enter. And of course, I don't need to do this manually. I can come and say replace. If we undo that, say replace structurally. And I can write code here and say find. And that will find all of the places where my code is there. And I can say you can't see it because the button is not visible because of the resolution of the screen. There you go. Replace selected. Okay? So that's also replace selected. And most of these inspections, they're kind of now following the default convention that we have, which is some are on, some are off. You can customize them. You can export them to your own profile. You can associate them with the exact project, etc. And if there's some that are off by default, you can always run them. You just say run inspection by name. And then here you can bring up any kind of inspection, for example, questionable name, which says find any badly named variables such as foo, bar, I, etc. And here you can see all of these different ones and run the inspections manually. Okay, now let's look at some debugging things. So the inline debugging, you're all aware of now. This has been on for some time. When I debug, I get this wonderful inline debugging. And if I know how to write code. So let's debug this. And if I know how to write code. So let's debug this. right? So I get all of the nice inline debugging, okay? You see that I get all of this. Notice though, however, that in the debugger, I'm getting inline debugging. And now what we're doing is trying to make it faster, the debugger. So essentially, until you don't want to actually evaluate a variable, that you hit on it, it can, by default, not render the data of that. But you can also do custom rendering. Right? So here I get all of the information from my debug session. But I can also do custom rendering. So let's say, for instance, I go to customer over here, and hold on, what am I looking for? Okay, let's go to customer. Debugging, inline debugging. Right. So here I have, for instance, let's create a new customer. Let's create a new Java file. Run this. And then we'll do PSVM, then customer, customer equals new customer, right? So now customer, get last name or set first name equals something, and set last name equals something else. Set a breakpoint. Debug. So I get the watches here on the customer, and I've got the first name and the last name. What you can also do is add class level watches. So I can say new class level watches, get first name plus some string, get last name. And then this essentially exists for me at the class level, right? And it's only there at the class level. So I can add new watches that are part of that specific object and customize the class level there. So this is a simpler way than adding what we are known as the renderers, right? So you can create renderers in IntelliJ. Over here, Java type renderers. So for a specific type, you can actually have the debugger render it in a specific way. But these would be global. And what you can do is add class level ones so that they're only available in the context of that class. By the way, there is a right button click here, and there's a more here that pretty much nobody ever clicks on, but this is quite useful because it allows you to do silent debugging or stop only conditionally on a specific breakpoint or log to output without having to step through. Single line lambdas. Okay. Now here, what I can do is actually, let's go to another project which I have. So here I have a project, and I'm going to debug it. Now this is a whole bunch of wonderful functional code, right? They told us use streams, and we use streams, and they said concatenate one function after another, and we did. And then we end up with 300 dots and function calls, and then in about 5 years, we don't know what we've actually written, and we can't even debug this. Here, what I'm doing is I've got a stream of words, and then I'm saying, okay, distinct, and then I've got a map, and then I've got a filter, and then I've got another distinct, and then I've got a collectors joining, right? And at some point, when you're debugging this, you're like, I need to have a mental map of exactly what is going on in each stage. What you can actually do is use the Java Stream Debugger. So if you click this, it comes up with a nice little box that shows you all of your input, and then when you do distinct, it shows you all of your output. Notice how the lines are, oh, let me make that smaller. See how the lines are navigating? And then when you do a map, it shows you everything that it's mapped. And then the filter, what gets filtered, distinct, what is distinct, and then finally the collect. And that is extremely useful when you're trying to understand some code and see exactly what's going on. Okay? If you are, I'll give you a heads up and a little warning that if you are using this and you're playing with Java 9, JDK 9, currently there's this minor little bug which we're working on fixing, so the two are incompatible. So if your project is using Java 9, this won't work, but soon it will be fixed. Then we also added a plugin, which is the JVM Debug Memory Viewer, right? And what this allows me to do is essentially, this is one other thing, right? It's so easy to install and uninstall a plugin, but then every time you do, you have to reboot IntelliJ, which doesn't work great when you're doing presentations, right? But they promised me for the year 2037, they'll fix that. So if I go to memory view, let's go to the other project. So here I have the memory view. And if I debug this, set a breakpoint, for example, here. By the way, notice this key promoter. This is a new version of it. The new version is called Key Promoter X. It's kind of like iPhone X. It's the best ever key promoter we have ever made, except I don't think we made it. And it's very good because it's every time you press a keyboard, every time you use a mouse, it tells you stop using the mouse. Use this keyboard shortcut instead, right? So you see that I don't know how to use IntelliJ properly, so it constantly pops up and makes me look stupid. So JVM memory view, JVM memory debugger. So as I step through, why is it not showing me? That's weird. Okay, so we have this thing which shows memory and the count of the objects, and every time you loop. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But hey, that's why I'm running EAPs. You see that? That's called an EAP. That's my get out of jail card. Every time something doesn't work, I'll just say, I'm using an EAP. And you don't know if it's that it really doesn't work or I just don't know how to work with it. But we'll just pretend that it doesn't work. Right. With databases, I hope that if you are using databases for storing information, which essentially means that you're using databases, anything other than MongoDB, because you want your data to actually be saved. We have support for databases, so you have all of this, queries and all of that. So if I say, for instance, query completion, much the same way that we saw with the inject language reference, you can do inject language reference here as well. So I've uninjected here, and you see that this is a string. If I do inject language reference and put the dialog, which is light, SQLite, this then gives me all of the benefits of IntelliSense, completion, and analysis. So I could say now employee dot address, etc. Right? And then I can also say Alt-Enter, run query in console with the actual address, etc. Okay? So you get all of the benefits of databases. And if you're using DataGrip, which is one of our tools, so DataGrip is essentially all of the functionality for databases of IntelliJ in its own product. There's also source control. You know, the good thing that we have here is, again, we try and focus you on what you're doing. So a lot of times when you're checking in source control, there is an issue with a diff or whatever, and you want to do an edit. Don't ever cancel. Don't ever, you know, come here and say, oh, I've got to fix this, so I cancel and cancel this, because you can actually do all of the editing in line. So I can come here and delete this and then do the check-in directly there. Okay? So all of those editing is online. If you're using something like Git, you have this wonderful option here, which is amend commit, which means that the last commit that I did, commit it again with a fix and not create a new commit like we always do. And then you could do like all of the wonderful things like cherry picking and the things that you can basically do all from the IDE. There's also the ability to do an undo commit. One of the things that I showed you was that I mentioned is the test RESTful web service, right? So the test RESTful web service, if you're familiar with Postman in Chrome, is essentially the same thing, right? It's a little tool that allows you to reach HTTP endpoints. So if you're doing any kind of server-side development, you can essentially add headers over here with different values. So for instance, I can say accept, and then here say application JSON, right? And these can be added, and then you can just do a request, get back the results. Problem with this is that you constantly have to write it and use a UI. Now we have the ability to do that all in a file. So you can create a file with the extension .http, and then you get all the completion here. So accept, right? Application JSON with completion, and then I can just come here and run this. And that gives me the request, the response headers at the bottom. I can then click on the log and get information about all of the different requests that I've made, and all of that is available. And to finalize, you know, I'm not terminal, and all of the other built-in tools are kind of easy, but there are a bunch of tools or functionality that don't come shipping out of the box. Some of the favorite ones are, in terms of plugins, if you're using IDEA Vim, if you like Vim, there's IDEA Vim, which essentially gives you the benefits of code editing with the editing features of Vim inside IntelliJ IDEA. There's another one that I like a lot, which is called Metrics Reloaded, which I actually have that installed. Metrics Reloaded is by one of our colleagues, Baz, and it's got a whole bunch of information about your code base in terms of class coupling, afferent coupling, efferent coupling, cyclomatic complexity, a whole bunch of statistics and graphs that it can generate. And also, how many of you use Kotlin, the language Kotlin? Okay, so today you'll see Kotlin and you will 100% guarantee fall in love with it. And when you leave today, you'll all be using Kotlin. But if you can't use Kotlin, you know that we have in IntelliJ the ability to fold code, right? That's a simple code folding. So there's an actual plugin which is called Plugins, and it's Advanced Java Folding. Now, the idea here is for me to restart one more time. But apart from that, it is essentially taking the code folding to the extreme. Now, it looks nice, but it is also kind of scary, because when you look at your code now, it doesn't look like Java anymore. Well, it might look like Java 10 or Kotlin, but it certainly doesn't look like the Java you wrote, right? So let's go and see some class over here, for instance. Let's say single lambda expressions, or let's say memory view. So you see I have val now, right? That's actually Java code, but it's doing code folding. So it's saying that this is a read-only variable, which in Kotlin and Scala is represented as a val. And if I click on it, it converts it to what it was, right? Cars plus equals Toyota. Plus equals doesn't exist in the Java we know. So that's actually a cars.add, right? If less than %. So it's essentially folding your code. And of course, you can configure as much as you want in the code folding, right? But as I said, it's nice, but then again, sometimes if you push it to the extreme, your code looks radically different inside the IDE as it does on paper, right? So, yep. Anyway, those are the tips and tricks. Hopefully you've learned something new. If you haven't, I'm sorry, and I'll run away from stage. And next up is teamware tools, and I'm going to introduce my colleague, Michael Vink, who will slowly, very, very slowly, walk up the stage and speed up. Get up. Come on. Thank you.